Thank you.
Thank you.
So, hello everyone. Today, thank you for being here for another webinar. So, today we're going to have the Regulatory Medical Devices webinar presented by Dr. Lejla Alic. So, actually, Regulatory Considerations, MPI-based medical devices. So, Dr. Lejla, she's an associated professor at the University of Twente, where she leads an academic group focused on the research and development of medical devices, from concept and prototyping to clinical translation and valorization. She's an active senior member of the IEEE, serving on the AMBC Diversity Panel and the AMBC Conference Editorial Board. She holds a master's degree in electrical engineering from Delft University of Technology and a PhD from Erasmus University, Rotterdam, earned through the Advanced School of Computation and Imaging of the Graduate School for Molecular Medicine. So today we are going to hear a lot about the regulatory considerations. So the floor is yours, Lejla.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you all for being here today in, I would say, wonderful autumn weather, but in the Netherlands it's really gray. Anyways, I come with a very wide background, as Gabrielle was saying as well, and in during last decades, I must say, I manage a lot of different medical devices. That's all besides my academic expertise as well, the different medical devices, the regulatory pathways, TRL levels, organize the groups from R&D management perspective, etc. And with that view as a wide basis, I'd like to introduce the possibilities, at least, how to make sure you maintain and organize your regulatory pathway from academic perspective. And if I think about how many times did I hear actually from fellow researchers the complaints and the stuff, now how do we go from that napkin into something that is actually feasible in terms of medical devices? But if I would try and compile into less sentences, that would be: we'll worry about regulatory later, we are developing our technologies now, and we will worry later. And the second one will be clinical trials. Impossible for new not CE marked devices. And I would say the first sentence, we'll worry about regulatory later, makes it actually really, really expensive. And I hope within the next half an hour or something, I would convince you that that is neither expensive, neither impossible to set up, let's say, a way how to do that within academic situation. Now, before that, if you start with thinking about actually how the human testing started, that's an example from a lot of years back. However, what this person did here is interesting stuff. He electrocuted 200 monks. And I suppose I'm talking about everyone here in this webinar. We don't want to do that anymore. So that's not allowed anymore. And that's a good thing to say. But there are more recent examples where medical regulatory or medical devices were failing. And we all know examples of failing breast implants, thalamoid tragedy of those babies being born without limbs, etc., and everything in between. And the thing is, we want to prevent that. We don't want that happening ever again. But there are also less recent examples on Wild West, USA situation, where basically everyone could have set up some kind of truck and sell anything they want to, and unless they will be killed by some unhappy customer, they were allowed to do so. No questions asked. So that is actually more or less the situation where the FDA started organizing something within, organizing a framework, if you wish, with a very simple mission, basically to protect the public health. And that is very simple situation here. That's what we want. That is what is actually needed as well. So when we try to compare, and C is not really different to FDA, there might be different regulations, but they're very, very, very similar, to be honest. When we compare, the first thing we have to decide is what class medical devices are we talking about? And going from left to right, we go from class 1 to class 3 medical devices. And I think what's striking here is that higher risk assessment, the higher class. That's something we should remember. And I think that's another striking thing. We tend to do stuff a little bit more complicated, have a little bit more rules in Europe compared to FDA, but all in all, the things are very, very similar. And yet another example of that rather similarity, or whatever you want to call it, FDA and C are very similar, as I said. If I was giving this webinar 15-ish years back, the common sense would be everyone goes for C, but because that is easier to achieve compared to FDA. And nowadays, the situation is turned around. A lot of companies, international companies, will have a preference to go to FDA rather than the CE first. So that is a thing that actually has changed a lot. And in the meantime, CE is lagging behind FDA. Well, we had some issues when it comes to that. We changed to a new MDR. We lost UK, so to the Brexit. At certain point, all the notified body needed reassigning, etc. So we went from hundreds and hundreds of notified body to very few. We over that burden so far, so that's not a problem. There are some waiting time, but that is not a problem anymore. So it's kind of we are more or less at the level where you say FDA and C are comparable, and in a lot of options they are. When we talk about time to approval, for example, both in theory take more or less around 6 months to get the device approved. I'm talking about class 2 devices, well in the middle of the whole range. But the thing is, FDA does provide more conversational level of approval, while CE actually is really limited in that sense. And that makes it really important for CE, if you are applying for a CE mark, to make sure everything is in there and you haven't forgotten anything. The thing is also, you have to start working on your pathway as soon as you are starting your own research. And that is definitely possible. How do we do that? You actually embed R&D, medical devices, within an academic setting. And you actually rely on a process itself. And basically, if you follow the CE MDR rules, this is all really, really logical and not that difficult at all. I must say everything starts with intended purpose, as FDA says, or intended use, as we redefine that in Europe. And that is something that is extremely, if there is one thing you should remember from today, is everything starts with intended use. You have to define what is intended use of your medical device, right? That's usually a sentence. It might be a little bit complicated sentence. It's never a section or several pages. It's a just sentence. And with that one sentence, you define regulatory classification, you define a risk assessment, testing requirements, evaluation pathways, and everything that is necessary to do, basically. But then it's a thing. If you have a misalignment between intended use and actual performance, what is your medical device actually doing, then you're facing the delays and non-compliance and actually no CE at all. Moving forward, let's say we defined an intended use for a specific medical device, and then there is a simple questioning, following the rules and defining which medical device class are we talking about when talking about a CE mark. In case of MPI device, it's clearly not as simple as class 1. It is not really implantable either, even though we use nanoparticles. So we should be within a range of class 2 medical devices. And in that case, there is, before I move on, I'd like to point out there are two different laws, if you wish, legislations. In the EU, we have to adhere to. So we have EU regulations and EU directives. When we talk about EU regulations, that means that as soon as a regulation is accepted, it means that it directly translates into national laws. However, when we talk about the directives, it means that it needs national implementation first. So I don't know, the things like CO2 that is on binding on the resolve levels only, so different countries can have a different interpretation. So these days we drive 100 kilometers per hour in the Netherlands, while other countries like Italy might choose different ways how to decrease the CO2. But what's nice in here is that a lot of regulations bound to medical devices are actually really regulations. So we do have harmonization and conformity within Europe itself. And always, to make things less boring, we have stuff that it's neither or both of those, like AI, quite recent AI Act, which is more of a layered framework, that the immense existing regulations, etc. But in case of MPI devices, I would rather say, since it will be phasing in up to 2027, and that's what Europe always worked, we will probably have phasing in next 5 to 10 years. So nothing we should be, there would be any concern so far. But again, there are a lot of other things when it comes to AI as well. Again, just a quick reminder, when we talk about medical device regulatory, it's always kind of related to a physiological, pathological condition, underlying condition, impairment, something like that. And we are talking about safety of predicting treatment response or maybe monitoring therapeutics, etc. So going back to MPI itself, we are, and I'm not going to introduce magnetic particle imaging at all, so that's not the scope here, but in a widest form, magnetic particle imaging, where it depends on injectable magnetic nanoparticles. We talk about static electromagnetic field, we talk about a dynamic electromagnetic field, we also probably talk about some kind of AI-based software, and eventually it is an imaging device. I'm not talking about drawing any conclusions from the imaging, doing any post-processing AI for diagnostic purposes at all. This is complicated enough to start with. And then we have all those regulations we have to follow in this case. And I have let's say the later three that are kind of less prominent in there. Those are the first, the things we shouldn't be worrying about when setting up, let's say, the whole process in there. And what I would like to in the simplest form, going from left to right. We have an engineer. In this case, in case of MPI, we had someone of a group of people pioneering magnetic particle imaging 20 years back, and a lot of experiments, a lot of building, a lot of things happened, and then all of a sudden we had some kind of imaging device. In this case, it still is preclinical imaging, but yet we are going to towards a real clinical device. But as soon as as they have started with MPI devices 20 years ago, we should have started with building MDR documentation as well. Eventually, what we're talking about, the medical doctors will make some kind of decisions about treatments or diagnostic decisions based on those images, or incorporate AI in there as well. So what we have to think about, to put in the loop, is a clinical performance and the safety of the users, but also patients or anyone involved, but also safety environment. Now, you name it, everything should be incorporated there. And again, all those rules we have to follow. It seems a lot, but it starts with a very simple thing, which is general safety and performance requirements. And that is a document, requirements that are part of MDR and everything else. That's something that should be explored at the start of the project. And usually, and I understand that, we have a grant and we start a project, and 3 to 6 years later, a project ends with few papers, maybe a prototype, and that's all it is. And then at a certain point, you start again from zero, from scratch, from nothing. You lose a lot of information. So what is, in my mind, way better approach is to start with GSPR at the start of a project. So you identify what is relevant to your device, and then think upstream how to integrate the decisions and relevant items into your device design. Risk controls measures, extremely important, etc. You have to identify standards, harmonize or not, but if they are not available, then there's some common specifications or comparable devices as well. And if I was to put that in a table form, then we will be talking about those things. You need to start with GSPR and start with assumptions and searching for underlying ISOs, IECs, etc. How does that look like? Well, the very basic stuff we should start with is ISO 14971, which is actually a risk management process. Nothing more, nothing else. And we build. So we talk about MPI devices. That means that we will have some kind of software in there. So that would be 62304s. It will be probably someone is going to use that. So we're talking about 62366, etc. So I hate those numbers, etc. So there are a lot of, you will be talking about compatibility, 10993. You will be talking about electromagnetic compatibility as well, etc. But what is striking here is you have everything leans on fundamentals of risk management, and then you have on the left-hand side the content-wise things based on the performance. So use electromagnetics, it is electrical safety, etc., the biocompatibility, etc. But then you also have things like process. That's ISO 13485, where we talk about quality management system, which is absolutely necessary in case you're talking about something that is CE certifiable. So what do we talk about when we talk about risk management? When we talk about risk management within an MDR, it doesn't mean device shouldn't be risky at all. Everything is connected to intended use, the context, and basically to um, whatever you are trying to do with your device. So intended use, right? Um, so you'll have to review, identify, assess and eventually control all the risks possible, or the risks thinkable, even going to that infamous "do not put cats in a microwave" stuff. So all those stupid and less stupid risks, you have to review them, you have to control them in a way. If we move forward to again, why medical device fail, and it's typical because deficiency safety check procedures, we do not follow um, uh, the procedures itself, or we just forgot, lack of attention to potential risk, we just forgot to mention certain risks. I'm not talking about cat in a microwave, but there are a lot of risks you could have thought about it if you take all potential users of a certain device. And ashamed to admit that is usually over enthusiasm of researchers, maybe manufacturers, in some kind of hurry to put a product into the market, and we want to prevent that from happening. But we want to do that within an academic setting where this is still payable and we still have enough funds to do that and proceed. So again, this is not a punishment. This is necessary in order to control the risk and prevent all those nasty things happening from either misuse or failure of medical devices. So again, risk management is necessary to ensure device usability, safety, and regulatory compliance, extremely important. And by developing medical devices, we are faced with tasks making medical devices safe for human use. Easy, at least the logical things to do. And you do that using risk management as a tool, nothing more, nothing less. So how do we do that? Well, you have to define risks first. And actually, it's nothing else than probability times severity of a certain harm, potential harm, being physical injury, but then we could talk about environmental, the damage to the property, etc., etc. So what you usually do is you organize a meeting, and sometimes that's a full day meeting, and sometimes that's a week meeting, but then you invite all potential users, and that includes, at least in the role, that includes, let's say, the hospital owners, the hospital legislators, the patients, patients' families. Maybe there is the cleaning. You need to clean the medical device, then you need a cleaning lady, all kind of physicians, etc. When we talk about MPI, which still doesn't have embedding in a clinical surrounding, it's fair to assume we will be talking about radiologists, and maybe in case of cancer, there will be, let's say, oncologists, etc. So you identify your and you all potential users in different ways, identify all hazards possible within together with all those users. And for each hazard individually, you define the risk, right? As severity times the frequency, or the probability times severity. So when it comes to analysis risk level, as I said, it's not on diminishing risk within that medical device. It's all about when is something acceptable. And again, it depends on your population or a patient group together with intended use. It's a very maybe stupid example, but still, when we talk about palliative care, so cancer patient in palliative care that would, let's say, receive a medication and give him, let's say, painless rest of his or her life for whatever, how many days he or she has, with the risk of developing, I don't know, breast cancer in 30 years, I think that risk is acceptable. However, if you talk about, I don't know, having flu and medication that would easy that for a week with the same risk level, in that case, that would be unacceptable risk level. So it's everything is connected to intended use, to your population, and basically to context you're talking about. Choosing these things cleverly, it's not a trick, it's a necessity when we talk about MDR. And you basically end up with some kind of tables, vibrate tables on both severity and probability levels. And obviously, when we talk about the risk, green is good, risk is low, yellow is something that is acceptable, probably under all circumstances, and red is something you might need to mitigate, not in all cases, but often you would. And then moving forward, it's just a simple example how we organized our QMS in this case, and a document itself. In this case, it's just simple folder-based system where everything is tracked, when, who's done what, when, why, etc. And then it end up you feeding, you have a lot of risks. So you end with let's say the residual risk, which is sum of all the risks after all the medications, etc. And then you get in. And basically, when you've done that, you produce already one of the documents MDR requires. Now, how to have that, all of that, within your research setting and within, let's say, medical setting as well on the right hand side. From engineering perspective, I suppose the fee model is something we as engineers already know. If you zoom in into that, what you see is basically your intended use feeding into user specification that would define the requirements and go down the whole way up to unit level design. And suppose the people that work for companies are actually bored or do not like those things, seeing the fee model, but it really actually helps in everything. When the things get a little bit more scary or entirely scary is you define it intended use, you have your user specification, and you go down to the unit level design and you implement your prototype. And that's what's scary. You have to freeze development. That's so counterintuitive. It doesn't mean you have to freeze all developments until your retirement. No, that's not what it says. This specific development you have to freeze temporarily till you could perform all the tests going up from unit tests all the way up to acceptance tests that would actually close your V model into comparing user specification and hence intended use by using in vivo tests. And in this case, in vivo tests is something that I would consider like animal testing, etc. Now, coming from there, we may or may not go into clinical trials. Well, clinical trials is something we may or may not need for a specific medical devices. And it is always clear that you need clinical trials for class 3 devices, which is MPI is probably not going to be. It's also clear you will probably not need them for class 1 devices, which is MPI probably not again. And you have the special cases we are not going to consider now. The most important thing, if there is enough evidence that the working principle of your device is supported by either clinical or the literature studies, etc., there is really real chance, probability that you do not even need clinical trials. There's a way to do that. But again, it is connected to intended use, nothing more, nothing else. But let's say we might need clinical trials. There is still something to consider, and that is actually really simple choices here. You either have CE mark device, which we do not in case of MPI. So we will have not CE mark device that's produced either by a company or it is in-house built. And then there's certain legislation that MDR accounts for. I'll come back to that later. There are even flows. This is, I have to apologize, this is in Dutch, and this is more of an example. The things are actually often in underlying the languages of a specific country, but basically what it says, under which article are you allowed to do your clinical trials? And I have them summarized here. We have three options, 62, 74, and 82. And a bottom line is, if you, I mean, you could take a look and read through it, but bottom line in this case is when you develop medical device, and we do not have CE marked medical device, so we're developing, as long as sponsor is the manufacturer, so we develop our own devices and are going to test it. The best option is to do that in a hospital, so have hospital as a manufacturer of a medical device, test it in that case, but test it for solely purpose of, let's say, improvement of technical details for a medical device. Then all of a sudden, there is a nice option to test medical device in a clinical trial under Article 82. You cannot use that data to support your CE claim. However, you could use a lot of information to improve your medical device, build your documentation towards something that is useful to MDR. But as I said so many times, everything is kind of connected to between intended within a context, if you wish. So intended use in a patient group basically define how do you move through regulatory pathway for medical devices. Now with that, I'm going back to my sentence. We will worry about regulatory later and clinical trial. That's impossible. Hopefully, you do have a way how to do those things now, and you feel urgency to start as early as possible. So that will conclude my webinar for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your webinar, Lejla. Pretty illustrative, the main idea of regulations in medical devices. So for our participants here, the ones who has some questions for Lejla, please write here in the chat that I can read it. And in the meantime, since that we don't have a question yet, I have one, of course. So Lejla, you mentioned about the GSPR, and my primary question would be, which stage that device development would be recommended to initiate the integration between the regulatory authorities to ensure a smooth approval process? So as I could understand in the presentation, it should be starting the beginning of a project. Is it right?
Well, I would say you start with your thinking about regulatory as soon as you write a grant proposal, because you're going to have to puts quite some money into project management, advisory, consulting, etc., in order to figure out which pathway to move. So I would say as early as possible. We do not start early enough with the regulatory pathway, and that's unknown. But that's nothing more than a good project management. So as soon as you have your napkin, you should scan that, put it in a document, and call it what it is. That's the start of your regulatory pathway, basically.
Understood. So, thank you for the answer. So, anyone has a question yet? So I think I can do a second one. So, like right now, related to MPI based. So, can you give your opinion about like what are the most common regulatory challenges encountered when we try to translate MPI from the clinical system research to a clinical use? That is a pretty
Most,
common
it's a
question
good
in our
question.
area. Yes.
It's a good question. That's a good question. What are the challenges when you're going to translate MPI? Well, um, MPI is not thing on its own. That makes it difficult because MPI relies on magnetic nanoparticles. Without magnetic nanoparticles, you would have identical situation as MRI, which still is potentially harmful and very difficult to run through regulatory pathway. However, because you do not inject anything, it is easier. On the other hand, MRI also uses tracers, so that's definitely possible. And then thinking about what are the challenges, I think the making sure the nanoparticles wouldn't raise medical devices to the level 3. So defining as simple as possible intended use, because the testing, the documentation, all those things in that are well defined, that is something we could do for medical devices as well as for, let's say, MPI as imaging device as well. And if possible, I would go for, let's say, nanoparticles as accessory to a medical device, MPI being a medical device on its own without nanoparticles and using nanoparticles as accessory to that specific medical device, which was possible under earlier MDR. How far is that going to be allowed on the current new MDR? That is something to be find out at this point, and I think we should start talking to notified bodies and see what are their opinions. Can we do that or not? But that's the nanoparticles are actually kind of a difficult part in this one.
I understand. So I think someone has a similar question than mine. Maybe you could complement the answer. So Sadaf asked in the chat, since MPI is used in a combination with the magnetical tracers as a pharmaceutical product, how regulation are influenced by this specific fact? So this is exactly
It's
your thing.
exactly the same. This
Yes,
more or less the same question indeed. The question in the nanoparticles could be licensed as medical devices as well, depending on the intended use, because usually pharmaceuticals are something that has intended use to treat, heal, have some kind of intention, while nanoparticles do not have nanoparticles in their bare form have no intention to treat. They might cause temperature to rise. There might even be intention to have hypothermia as a treatment. And usually, if we talk about any treatment at all, that would be something that is conjugated to nanoparticles rather than nanoparticle itself. So in that sense, nanoparticles could be licensed as a medical device itself. But again, those are exercises that we have to keep talking to notified body and legislators and see how it works out.
Well done. So we have a second question here from Patrick. Hello, nice talk. For the biggest question, for me, the biggest question is how academic development teams should have the time and the manpower to do all this stuff. It looks like the time penalty is simply too high in academia. So
Yes,
yes.
I got the question. I got the question. Well, I could only thank you for your question, Patrick. Um, well, I could only give our own example. In the Netherlands, when we start, the research is mainly bound to, if you take a look who is doing legwork, there would be PhD students and postdocs. What do? We have 20% of their time dedicated for education. So what I proposed is cut that 20%. We don't do education. We use that for management. You always, it is more costly in a way. You will need to have one person dedicated in a whole research lab that would kind of be well informed, be a good R&D manager, and will follow the rules. Once set up, you will be even able to share that facility with different research groups. Because that would be more from a process perspective. So you will that's either group leader or someone else with a lot of management, R&D management experience that's basically doing nothing else than bugging people on I need document 223, fill in page 5, whatever. Someone that would follow the process and make sure everything we need along the way is filled in. And a lot of content work is basically, as long as you know, it's all in planning. So as long as you know which regulatory pathway you're following, then it's very clear what tests you have to do. And in terms of nanoparticles, you know you have to do your biocompatibility. You know you're gonna the list of tests are very, very clear. And often those tests you could actually perform and publish in scientific papers. So the output is actually not useless, also not in research setting. It's just the way how you frame it, basically. It's probably three tests will be combined in one scientific paper, and another two will be separated between three papers, or in that trend, more or less. Is that helpful?
I hope so. Yeah, they said yes. Okay. So we have another question from Hui. So he starts complicating stuff right now. So he said maybe the answers to this will be complicated, but I imagine a scenario that we are trying to develop a particle-based system like a contrast agent nanoparticles for diagnostic and prognostic purpose. And additionally, we use AI for imaging analysis. So the question is, what would be the best, the most relevant steps to be aware to the end? ISOs, norms, which is the
Right.
which is
Oh, I didn't want to start talking about AI. I did have a slide on that because there is, if we, as soon as we are talking about AI as a diagnostic tool, then AI might be influencing a human behavior as well. So the conclusions from a medical physician would be influenced by AI. Then all of a sudden, AI Act is really something that is important. And there are graphs and things, what to do, how to do that, etc. The most important thing from AI Act at this point, again, it's not in place just yet, but it's important to think about when you training on the job. So training AI within clinical applications is not allowed at all. So the question is it really AI, or are it the pre-trained models? Pre-trained models, AI or otherwise, that's fine, that's okay. having AI being trained in a field that is for medical devices at this point not allowed. And for the second part of you, I will try to find just scrolling back to the list of most important rules we have to. There would be few more back. Yes, I have the most important, let's say, regulations like GDPR, MDR, GPSR, etc., etc. Some of those things like cybersecurity and digital resilience that will be probably replaced by Cyber Resilience Act. It's not adopted yet, but it will be probably, which is not regulation which is not intended as regulation. So those things you have to take into account. And when we talk about, you might be talking about ISO norms, etc., that are relevant for medical devices. I haven't made if you're talking about that, I haven't made a complete list. There was the part of it going back in here, but that's just a part of it. There are way more things that are important when we talk about MPI as a medical device, including magnetic nanoparticles. Please reach out. I will try to make a complete list if that is of any use to you.
Sorry. So maybe if we wants to continue talk with Lejla about it, he can also send her a message, and I think she can answer it if he has other questions regarding the topic. So he said thanks. I think maybe Leila should come back to the slide with the V model because our last question is from Theo, and he asked them, I am lost a bit with in the V model. If I remember well, when you submit the GSPR/CE, what kind of performance data you submit to notify bodies while the device is still developed?
Device is not still developed. You cannot, that's the painful part here. You have the for device that you are submitting for CE mark, you have to stop, to freeze development at that point. But you could, and that's painful for researchers. I understand that. That's something you never want. You have zillion ideas. What I always say is write it down, put it away, start a new QMS, start a new. So you will probably have like 5 different versions of a same device pointing at the different levels. I could try to give you an example. Let's say we are developing MPI for cancer research for a brain tumor. Let's put it that way. We are developing MPI with corresponding nanoparticle for brain tumor. So you are developing that implementation is done. It's frozen. You are testing everything you could test, from usability to all kind of electromagnetic safety, everything you need to test through all those ISO and etc. But then, and that would be your prototype improves along the way before you submit it. You go into clinical trials. You have tested it on clinical level, so it's TRL 8, for example. However, all of a sudden you would want to change the intended use. It's not for, so your patient group is not brain tumor patients anymore. You would want to do that for liver patients as well. Then your intended use is changed. In that moment, the same tests you've performed for TRL8 are actually TRL3 because you haven't proven working for liver patients just yet. So that's what I mean by you could have different versions of a same document, of a same device on a different levels, and the same documentation pointing to each other on different levels. And a certain for the device 1, for the brain cancer, that would be TRL8, and in a case of a liver cancer, that would be TRL3. But the one that is submitted to CE, that would be frozen, definitely.
Okay, so well, we're we have more 5 minutes. Anyone has any other questions? If no, I'd say thank you so much for your presentation, Lejla. Your webinar was incredible. Thank you. Maybe we have one here. Actually, Theo answered. Actually, I meant you suggest to keep going with the development and avoid the frozen development. I think
No,
you reply correct.
I no, you have to freeze development for something because I haven't met a researcher yet. I have to meet a researcher yet that would say, I don't want to do any more research. I'm fine. The usually researchers come up
But
with the ideas on a daily basis.
for the version is that for that version that he's talking about, the ones that you requested, they need to be frozen.
That needs to be frozen. There is no other way.
Okay. So Patrick asked if you're going to have the slide available, the presentation available, and yes, we're recording. Even the presentation itself and the recording will be available. You can,
It's recorded, yes.
yes, if you want the specific presentation, you need to ask to Lejla. So if
Please reach out if you
she
need more
can.
information. I'm definitely open for it. No problem whatsoever.
Great. So thank you again, Lejla, for the presentation. Before everybody leaves, I'd like to say that next month we're going to have the last presentation of the year with Dr. Marco Giargiello, related to the basics of MPI tracers development. So I would like to see you all there. And if you have ideas of topics that you think that might be interesting to have webinars, please reach us by email or follow us in our LinkedIn account. So then we can discuss the topics, the possible topics that you can share with us, and then we can also bring speakers to talk about these specific topics. So thank you all for being here. Again, thank you, Lejla, one more time, our vice chair. So see you guys, and that's it.
Thank you for the patience. Take care. Bye bye.